The storm came down like God's fury, lightning ripping the sky into bone-white veins as thunder rolled the earth awake, and in that violence the steeple of the old prairie church cracked with a scream like wood, remembering sin. The bell fell first, smashing through rafters in a roar of splinters, shaking the ground so hard pews toppled and hymn books spilled like torn wings across the aisle. And when the dust cleared, the townsfolk who had come running with lanterns and prayers stood staring at a gash ripped open in the floor. Boards splintered, nails bent like crooked teeth, and beneath them something unnatural jutted up through the churned dirt. A trunk, iron-bound and scarred, its lid nailed so cruelly shut the wood bowed inward like it had been fighting to breathe. The pastor muttered scripture under his breath, his voice shaking as badly as the lantern light, while men with stronger stomachs hauled the heavy thing into the open, every scrape of wood on stone whispering like a warning. Clara, the blacksmith's daughter, pressed forward though her father's arm tried to bar her chest, her heart battering ribs like a sparrow in a snare because something in the air felt wrong. Too cold, too still, though the storm raged beyond the walls. Sheriff Ward spat into the dirt, jaw set hard, and drove the first pry bar into the seam, the nails shrieking as they tore loose, one by one, until the last hinge sagged like a coffin's sigh. When the lid groaned open, the lanterns wavered in men's hands, and for a breath the church itself seemed to stop. Inside, curled like a child in prayer, lay a girl no older than 12, her hair fanned pale across the lining, her dress yellowed by years of dust, yet her chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm, lips parting on a gasp that froze every living soul in the room. The widow Barker shrieked and crossed herself, stumbling back until her lantern crashed and hissed out in the dirt, while the pastor dropped his Bible, pages flapping in a draft that had no wind to make it. Clara clutched her father's sleeve, nails biting through cloth, her eyes wide and burning as the girl in the trunk coughed once, sharp and wet, and then whispered a name that hadn't been spoken in 20 years. Every man froze because they knew that name, knew it from whispers traded in the dark, from the stain it left on the town's past like blood you could never scrub from wood. Sheriff Ward swore under his breath, slammed the lid half shut as if to cram the voice back down, but the girl's eyes fluttered open, blue as winter steel, and she fixed them all with a gaze that carried no fear, only something older, something that didn't belong in a body so small. "You left me here," she rasped, voice dry as gravel, and the words slithered under the skin of every man who'd ever sworn he hadn't known, hadn't seen, hadn't nailed the last board down. Clara felt her stomach turn to stone as the lantern light shuddered, shadows clutching the walls, and in that instant she knew the storm hadn't cracked the church. It had pried loose a truth the town had buried alive. The lanterns quivered as if the flames themselves wanted to flee, and no one moved at first, no one dared, until Sheriff Ward dragged a ragged breath and barked at the men to lift her out, his voice cracked and dry like a rope about to snap. Two of them stepped forward, sweat sheening their foreheads, though the storm's chill breathed straight through the broken steeple, and their hands trembled as they reached into the trunk. The girl's skin was cold, cold as river stone left in shadow, yet soft, alive, her pulse fluttering faintly against their calloused palms as they raised her small frame into the glow of the lamps. The church filled with whispers, ragged and scared, like a flock ready to scatter, and someone muttered witchcraft while another swore it was trickery, a trick too cruel to speak. Clara's heart punched her ribs as she edged closer, drawn against her father's hissed warning, because she couldn't look away from the girl's eyes, open now, staring wide into the rafters where smoke from the storm seeped through, eyes that carried a hollow weight no child should wear. She clutched her torn dress to her chest, shivering, and when Sheriff Ward demanded her name, her lips parted around the sound that had already burned the air once, raw as a wound. That name, a name every soul in town had tried to forget, a name belonging to the preacher's daughter who'd vanished 2 decades ago on the night her family was slaughtered in the parsonage while the town slept. The sheriff's face went gray, mouth tightening, his eyes flicking to the pastor, who staggered against the altar as if struck, his knees buckling under the echo of memory too foul to cage. The girl's gaze rolled over them, slow, searching, like she was taking measure of what time had stolen, and her voice, rasped and splintered, carried through the pews. "You locked me in the dark, but I heard you pray above me." Gasps tore through the townsfolk, and one man dropped his lantern outright, its flame snuffing against the dirt, plunging half the church into shadow. Clara's stomach twisted, nausea biting sharp as the girl's words scraped deeper, painting the silence with accusation too heavy to bear. The widow Barker cried that it couldn't be, that the dead don't breathe, but the girl only coughed, thin and ragged, and when the sheriff tried to cover her with his coat, she pushed it away, her small fingers clawing at the fabric with strength no starved body should hold. 20 years, she rasped, and you let them nail me shut. The words struck like lashes, and Clara's father gripped her shoulder hard, pulling her back, muttering that they needed to leave, that no good could come of standing in the path of something that had cheated death. But Clara's feet stuck fast, her breath trapped like glass in her chest, because when the girl's eyes swept the crowd, they landed on her and held, pinning her through the gut like a spear. The storm rumbled above, thunder rolling through the broken steeple, and the girl whispered one more thing, quiet but sharp enough to cut every throat in the room. "You carry their blood too." The church seemed smaller with her standing there, smaller and meaner, as if the walls themselves wanted to crawl away from what they'd sheltered all these years. No one breathed loud. Even the storm outside held its tongue as the girl's words sank like knives into every ribcage. Sheriff Ward, jaw clenched so hard his teeth creaked, snapped at the men to set her down, his voice tight, brittle, the kind that hides fear by painting it as command. They laid her on a pew, lantern light dripping across her pale face, and for the first time Clara saw the truth. The girl's wrists bore scars, thin rings circling them where ropes or chains had once bitten deep. Scars too old for a body that should be 12. Scars that told of years lived in dark earth. The pastor tried to pray then, words stumbling and cracking as he raised a trembling hand over her, but she flinched, her eyes flashing with a cold fire that sent his voice scuttling back down his throat. "You preached above me," she rasped, her voice dry as dirt, "while I beat my fists against the lid." The pastor staggered back, clutching his chest, eyes wide as though ghosts clawed at his ribs. Whispers surged through the pews, questions twisting into fear. How could she breathe? How could she speak? And Sheriff Ward roared for silence, though his own hand shook against his holster. Clara felt her father's grip on her arm, the iron of his fingers digging deep, pulling her back toward the door, but she couldn't move her gaze from the girl, from those winter steel eyes that locked onto her like a nail hammered straight into bone. And then the girl's hand rose, frail but steady, one finger lifting to point across the pews, at Clara. The air cracked sharper than the storm when she whispered, "Blood of the ones who buried me." Gasps broke out like glass shattering, every head twisting toward Clara, her father's face twisting red with rage and fear as he shoved her behind him, shouting that it was lies, the devil's tongue in a child's throat. But Clara's stomach turned hollow, because deep inside she felt it. That something in her family's silence had always been wrong. That the night her mother burned every old letter in the hearth wasn't grief, but erasure. Sheriff Ward stepped forward, hand dropping hard on the girl's shoulder, snarling that she'd said enough, that the storm had cursed her tongue. But before he could wrench her upright, the girl's voice climbed jagged and fierce, filling the rafters with a strength too wild for her small frame. "The nails remember! The wood remembers! And blood cannot bury blood!" The pews rattled under her cry, dust raining from the rafters, lanterns flickering near to snuff, and Clara's heart slammed so hard she thought it might tear through her chest. The storm outside bellowed back, thunder rolling long and low as if the sky itself had heard her. The girl sagged then, body folding against the pew, but her eyes still burned, fixed unblinking on Clara. In the silence that followed, no one dared move, not even Sheriff Ward, until the widow Barker whispered the word no one wanted to name: curse. And in that instant, Clara knew the church was no longer a place of prayer. It was a coffin cracking open, and every soul inside was trapped in it with her. The word curse hung in the rafters like smoke no wind could clear, and the townsfolk shifted in their boots, eyes darting between Clara, the girl on the pew, and the sheriff who stood rooted with his jaw locked and hand pressed too tight against the iron at his hip. Clara's father yanked her arm so hard she nearly stumbled, his voice cracking like a whip as he barked that they were leaving, that his family's name wouldn't be dragged through dirt by a child pulled from a box of rot. But Clara dug her heels against the floorboards, her pulse screaming in her throat, because every beat of her heart seemed to echo the girl's gaze, that steel-blue stare that cut through denial like an axe through green wood. "You hear her!" the widow Barker cried, voice high and shrill. "She points at blood, she points at kin, and God himself tore the floor to show it." Panic rippled through the crowd, mutters rising like a swarm, and the pastor, pale as bone, shouted scripture to drown them, but his voice cracked under the storm outside, under the thunder that answered like a drum of judgment. Sheriff Ward slammed his fist on the pulpit, bellowing for order, sweat streaking his brow though the air bit cold. "This ends here," he roared, his voice a brittle iron. "She's delirious, she's poison, and I'll see her locked in the jail before one more lie spreads." He moved to lift the girl, but she shifted weakly, her head lolling, lips parting to whisper again that name, that cursed name from 20 years buried. And Clara saw the sheriff freeze, the muscle in his jaw twitch, the flash of something raw in his eyes that wasn't anger but fear, and it was then she knew. He knew the name because he'd buried it, hammered it down with his own hands while the town looked away. Her father barked for silence, swearing it was madness, that no child could live in wood for 20 winters, that this was trickery laid by Indians to rot their town from the inside. The words stung hot against the air, but Clara felt her stomach knot because even as he denied, his fingers shook, his nails biting blood into her arm. The girl coughed then, a sound that cut the air raw, and when she lifted her hand, there were specks of black blood on her palm. Yet her voice rose stronger, ragged but clear. "You sealed me, you prayed above me, and your daughters will wear my dust." Gasps broke the room like glass, mothers clutching their children back, men stepping away from Clara as if her skin already carried plague. Her father cursed and shoved her toward the door, but Clara twisted free, her chest burning with rage and terror as she cried over the thunder, "What did you do? Tell me what you did!" The words cracked through the church like lightning, and the sheriff's hand froze on his holster, his eyes snapping to hers, wide, cornered. For the first time, Clara saw not authority in his face, but guilt. Old, rotted, buried guilt clawing through. The girl sagged back against the pew, her lips curling faint around a smile that wasn't a child's smile, but something older, something knowing. And in that silence, broken only by the storm, Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her, because she understood now. The truth wasn't just nailed under boards. It was in her blood, her father's blood, the sheriff's hands, and the storm hadn't come to reveal it. It had come to collect. The church doors slammed open on a gust so fierce the lanterns guttered, smoke and snow curling inside, as though the storm itself had been listening, waiting. Townsfolk staggered back, clutching shawls, muttering prayers, but no one dared step into the night. They were penned here, penned like cattle in a slaughterhouse, with the girl's words thick in the air and guilt crawling the walls like a sickness. Sheriff Ward shoved his shoulders square, his voice snapping sharp as he pointed at the pew where she lay. "Enough! She's a poison, she's a lie, and before the night breaks I'll have her chained in irons." But his voice cracked at the edges, brittle as glass, and Clara saw it, fear burning behind the iron. The girl coughed, her lips parting red against white skin. And when her voice rasped again, it carried stronger than thunder. "You'll chain your own sins, Sheriff, but the nails remember, the wood remembers." Murmurs tore through the crowd, some stepping toward the sheriff, others back, the split jagged as a wound. The pastor raised trembling hands, stammering that they must pray, but the widow Barker shrieked that prayer hadn't saved the child when she was sealed in wood, and her cry broke something in the room. Men shouted, women sobbed, boots scraped as sides began to form, half demanding the sheriff face the name, the others snarling for silence, for the devil to be drowned before she cursed them all. Clara's father pulled her close, his face chalk, sweat beading through the wind cut like ice. "Not a word," he hissed at her ear, nails digging so deep she bit back a cry. "What's buried stays buried." But Clara's chest burned, her pulse thundering because she could feel the girl's gaze pinning her like a nail through cloth, dragging breath from her lungs. She tore free, voice ripping raw as she shouted into the storm of noise, "Tell me the truth! What did you do to her?" The room froze, thunder grumbling above as if the sky itself leaned down to listen. All eyes cut to the sheriff, his hand hovering over the holster, his jaw set stone hard. For a breath he said nothing, only glared at Clara like she'd torn open his skin. But then his voice came low, cold, a snake's hiss in the rafters. "I did what had to be done. She saw what no child should see, and the town paid me to silence it." Gasps buckled knees, men cursing, women covering mouths, and the girl's laugh, thin, dry, splintered, filled the church like nails dragged across stone. "Paid you," she rasped, "and you buried me instead." The sheriff's face twisted, rage blackening his fear, and he yanked his pistol free, leveling it at the child on the pew. "Enough!" he roared, spit flying. "This ends!" But Clara moved before thought, before breath, hurling herself between barrel and girl, arms out, voice cracking like lightning. "You'll kill her once, but you won't bury her twice!" The sheriff's hand trembled, finger tightening, the crowd screaming, some rushing forward, others bolting back. And in that chaos the girl's eyes locked on Clara, her whisper sliding like a blade through marrow. "Choose, blood of mine, silence or storm." The pistol's barrel gleamed in the lantern light, black as a coffin nail, and every breath in the church froze as Sheriff Ward's finger tightened on the trigger. Clara stood between him and the girl, chest heaving, arms out like a crucifix, the storm's howl tearing through the broken steeple as if the sky itself wanted to see which way this would break. "Step aside!" the sheriff snarled, his voice cracked with rage and fear. "Or I'll put you in the ground beside her." His words rattled through Clara's ribs, but she didn't move. her legs trembling like saplings in a gale, her eyes burning back into his with a fire she hadn't known she carried. "You already buried her," she shouted, voice raw. "And you buried your soul with her, but you won't bury me." The crowd surged, some crying for the sheriff to stop, others shrieking for him to fire. The town splitting down the middle like a log struck by lightning. Clara's father lunged forward, his face twisted, spitting that she was cursed, that the blood in her veins was poison, and his hand clawed her shoulder hard enough to drag her sideways. But before he could wrench her clear, the girl's voice rose from the pew. Hoarse, cracked, but louder than thunder. "Speak his name." The lanterns flickered hard, smoke coiling, and every head whipped to the child, her eyes blazing blue fire that scorched the rafters. Clara staggered, her heart slamming, because the name pressed like heat at the back of her tongue, a name she hadn't known she knew. Her father's grip went rigid, his nails cutting deeper, and he hissed at her ear, "Don't you dare!" But she did. The sound tore from her throat, raw, unstoppable. A name that split the silence like a blade. Jonas Ward. The sheriff's face cracked open at the sound, all the iron and command bleeding out in a heartbeat, leaving only a man stripped bare, eyes wild, gun hand shaking. Gasps ripped the church apart, voices shouting. The sheriff, the lawman, the man who'd sworn justice was the one who'd nailed the trunk shut. He bellowed denial, spittle flying, but the girl only smiled, thin and cold, her whisper crawling across the pews. He hammered the last nail. The crowd erupted, some screaming for rope, others for mercy, boots slamming against boards as the storm crashed above, rain breaking through the holes in the roof, hissing against the lamps. Clara's father shoved her toward the aisle, rage in his eyes, but she stumbled free, knife flashing in her hand before she'd even thought, steel trembling in her grip as she raised it between them. "No more lies," she rasped, voice cracking. "Not from you, not from him. If blood's cursed, then it's because of what you did, not me." Sheriff Ward staggered back, gun still raised but his face broken, torn between fury and shame, while the girl on the pew coughed once, blood on her lips, and whispered through the storm, "Truth or fire, tonight the wood splits." And as thunder cracked the sky wide open, the pistol jerked, the knife shook, and the whole church braced for the sound that would decide whether the storm carried mercy or ashes. The gunshot cracked like the sky itself tearing open, smoke blasting through the church as the pistol kicked, but Clara's knees didn't buckle, because the bullet hadn't struck her. Sheriff Ward's hand had jerked wide at the last breath, the shot biting a gouge into the altar and sending splinters across the pews. For a heartbeat the church hung in silence, breathless, every lantern flame trembling as if afraid to live another second. Then chaos erupted. Men roared, women screamed, boots thundered as half the town surged at the sheriff with fists and fury, the other half lunging to drag them back, to shield him. The church split in two, bodies clashing, benches overturning, psalms replaced by curses sharp enough to skin the air. Clara staggered, knife still trembling in her fist, ears ringing with the echo of the shot. Heart slamming like a drum beaten for war. Her father grabbed her arm, eyes wild, spitting that she damned them all, but she tore free with a strength born of terror and fury, voice cracking above the storm. "He nailed her in! He sealed her while you prayed above the floorboards!" The words ripped the breath out of the room. Even fists stilled, even rage froze, and all eyes whipped to the sheriff. His face sagged gray, his pistol slack in his grip, sweat pouring down his temples though the rain lashed cold through the broken steeple. His lips moved, no words spilling, only air, and then the girl's laugh slid across the pews like nails on slate, thin, cracked, cruel. "Confess," she rasped, "or the wood will." Thunder hammered the steeple, rain crashing in sheets, and Sheriff Ward finally broke, his voice guttural, torn out like entrails. "She saw me kill her father. She saw me strike the match. His words choked as the crowd shrieked, some roaring in rage, others crying out in horror, and the storm surged so hard the church groaned on its beams. The sheriff staggered forward, reaching for Clara with eyes red, spitting, "And your kin took their coin and turned away." Gasps clawed the air. Clara's legs went weak, her knife slipping, her chest locking like stone. Her father lurched at her then, fists trembling, shouting it was lies. But the truth bled raw across his face, in the tremor of his mouth, in the way his shoulders sagged as if under 2 decades of rot. "You knew," Clara whispered, voice shaking. "You knew, and you let him." Her father's silence was the only answer. The crowd broke again, fists and boots, men dragging the sheriff down, women screaming curses, lanterns spilling fire across the pews as wood crackled and smoke clawed upward. The church was burning from within now, the storm outside and the fire inside warring for who would claim them first. Clara's breath came ragged, her heart a blade sawing itself apart as the girl on the pew rose, impossibly steady, her pale hand reaching through smoke. "Blood of mine," she said, voice sharp as the wind. "Choose. Burn with them or carry me out." Smoke rolled thick as wool through the rafters, lantern oil licking into flame along the pews, sparks snapping like teeth as the church turned coffin hot, boards groaning, nails spitting out of beams with the crack of bones. The crowd scattered in panic, some clawing for the doors, others trampling each other in blind fury, while Sheriff Ward thrashed under fists and boots, his gun skidding across the floor into the fire. Clara choked on ash, tears burning her eyes as she staggered toward the pew, where the girl stood upright now, pale and trembling yet rooted in the chaos like a sapling grown from grave soil. Her blue eyes burned through the smoke, fixing Clara until her knees went weak, until her lungs begged to flee, but her voice rasped like stone grinding stone. "Blood of mine, choose." Behind Clara, her father's voice cracked, raw and broken, calling her name, his hand reaching through the smoke, pleading, but every word from him tasted like rot in her ears now. She saw the truth etched in his face, the guilt buried deep in his marrow, and her chest hardened. She turned from him. The girl swayed, the floor trembling under the storm's drum and the fire's roar, and Clara lunged, catching her small frame against her chest. The child's skin was ice, colder than death, but her breath fanned hot against Clara's neck, proof of something crueler than miracle. "I've got you," Clara gasped, staggering as the beams above split with a crack, fire showering sparks onto her hair. The girl's head pressed against her shoulder, her whisper cutting through the roar. "Then you'll carry their sins too." Clara stumbled down the aisle, dodging a man who barreled past, screaming, dodging a burning hymn book that fell like a star from the loft. Sheriff Ward clawed to his knees, blood streaming down his face, his voice shredded as he bellowed through the smoke, "Don't take her! Don't you see? She'll drag you down!" His words slammed against Clara's spine. But she didn't stop, didn't slow, even as her legs burned with weight that wasn't just the girl's body, but 2 decades of nails and wood and blood. She crashed through the doors into the storm, rain hitting her face like knives, the cold slamming her lungs as fire bellowed behind, the church roaring into full blaze. Townsfolk scattered across the mud, some wailing, some fighting still, their faces streaked with ash and terror. Lightning tore the sky open, laying the prairie bare. And in that flash, Clara saw the girl's face close to hers, eyes shining with something ancient, not child, not ghost, but truth wrapped in bone. "You'll burn it all," the girl whispered, her lips cracked, her breath like smoke. "Or it will burn you." Clara stumbled into the mud, clutching her tight, the rain hissing as it met her tears, and somewhere behind her the steeple groaned once, twice, before crashing down in a scream of fire and ash that shook the earth. And still, the girl breathed. The storm clawed the prairie raw, rain hammering the mud until it sucked at Clara's boots, each step a war to stay upright with the girl's weight pressed cold and heavy against her chest. Behind them the church burned high, flames devouring the steeple, sparks flung into the night like souls set loose, the bell's twisted wreckage tolling as it collapsed into the fire. Townsfolk scattered in shadows, some screaming, some crawling on their knees, faces lit hellish in the blaze. Sheriff Ward staggered from the doorway, his coat torn, blood black in the rain, eyes wild as he stumbled down the steps with pistol in hand. His voice cracked like thunder as he shouted across the downpour, "Put her down, Clara! You don't know what you're carrying!" She stopped, chest heaving, mud sucking her to the ankles, the girl's hair plastered to her cheek. Her breath cold as smoke against Clara's neck. "She's mine!" Clara shouted back, voice raw, ragged, shaking with fury and fear. The sheriff lifted his pistol, arm quaking but steady enough, his mouth twisting, words ripped from his chest like rot from a wound. "She'll damn you, same as she damned me." The girl's eyes opened then, slow, deliberate, bright blue even through the rain, and her voice slithered into Clara's ear, soft as a snake's hiss. "He lies. He damns himself. The nails remember." Clara's hand tightened around the knife, still clutched in her palm, her breath ragged, and in that heartbeat she understood. The storm hadn't freed this child to be saved. It had freed her to be avenged. Sheriff Ward stumbled closer, gun raised higher, lightning tearing the sky above his head, his voice breaking into a plea. "Don't you see? She's not a child. She's the curse we buried. Drop her." The girl stirred in Clara's arms, small hands gripping her dress, whispering so faint only Clara could hear. "Choose. Blood of mine, my fire, or his." Clara's pulse hammered, the storm screaming around her, rain washing blood and ash down her arms. Ward's eyes bored into hers, wide, desperate, begging through the barrel. Clara's father lurched from the shadows then, staggering, face streaked with mud and terror, crying her name, but she barely heard him over the roar in her head. The girl coughed, black flecks staining her lips, her eyes burning like lanterns held too close to oil. "He nailed me shut," she rasped, louder now, "and your blood turned away. Make it remember." Ward stepped closer, pistol trembling inches from Clara's face, spittle mixing with rain as he spat. "Put her down or I'll kill you both." And Clara's body trembled, torn between the pistol's shadow and the cold weight in her arms, between the man who wore law like a mask and the child who carried death in her breath. The storm howled, lightning split the night, and in that blinding flash Clara's knife lifted high. Lightning split the sky so bright the whole prairie froze in white fire, and for that heartbeat Clara saw everything. Her father cringing in the mud, the sheriff's pistol trembling inches from her face, the girl in her arms staring up with eyes too old for a child, blue flames flickering in their depths. The storm roared, thunder shaking the ground like drums of war, and Clara's breath hitched as the girl whispered one last time, her voice sharp as nails hammered into bone. "Choose." The pistol barked then, deafening, muzzle flash searing her eyes, but Clara had already moved, lunging sideways, mud exploding under her boots as the shot sang past her ear. Her knife drove forward with all the weight of 2 decades buried, plunging into Sheriff Ward's chest just beneath the badge. His eyes bulged wide, his pistol falling limp. And for a moment he staggered, blood running down into the rain like ink washing off parchment. His lips moved, choking, but no words came. Only a final gurgle as his knees buckled and he dropped into the mud with a thud that was swallowed by thunder. Clara stood shaking, knife slick in her fist, rain washing the blood down her arm, the girl's breath ragged against her neck. Around them the townsfolk stood in stunned silence, faces lit by the dying fire of the church, eyes wide as if they'd all seen judgment fall and weren't sure who it spared. Clara's father stumbled closer, reaching for her with shaking hands, tears mixing with the rain. "It wasn't me," he gasped, voice breaking. "I didn't drive the nails, I just—" His words died when the girl lifted her head, her gaze pinning him like a spike, and whispered, "But you turned away." He fell to his knees, sobbing into the mud, and Clara felt no pity left in her bones. She turned from him, from all of them, clutching the girl as the storm raged. "What now?" she whispered hoarse, her throat torn from smoke and fear. The child's head tilted against her shoulder, her lips brushing Clara's ear with words soft as death. "Now you carry me, until the nails remember all their names." Clara's stomach knotted, dread pressing heavy as iron, but she nodded, because she knew there was no undoing what the storm had unearthed. Behind her, the church collapsed in a final scream of timber and flame, sparks spinning into the rain, and the townsfolk scattered like leaves, unable to face what still breathed in her arms. She walked into the storm, the girl's weight cold and certain against her chest, each step sinking into mud thick as blood, and she didn't look back. Dawn broke faint beyond the clouds, pale and bruised, the sky the color of old scars, and Clara felt the world change with it. The curse wasn't buried anymore. It was alive, breathing, and it had chosen her. And as the wind carried the ashes of the church across the prairie, one thought seared itself into her marrow. The last nail had never held. It had only waited.